So our first lesson is going to be how we start the drawing. And we're going to look at a few components that have to do with getting a gesture on our paper. And a gesture is a simple sketch or a basic sketch that allows us to present our subject matter onto our paper. It will also allow us to establish the size or scale of our drawing in relationship to our paper. And it'll start to give us some sense of where the different elements are going to be placed in our drawing. Elements are just the subject matter. It could be a single subject matter, or it could be a combination of items that we're drawing. The process and steps that we're going to be discussing and drawing today can be applied and really should be applied to anything that we draw. It doesn't matter whether it's a person, a landscape, an animate object of some kind. The subject matter is irrelevant. What we want to do is apply the same steps, the same process, no matter what. This will eliminate confusion, guessing, and it will give us something that we can use as a foundation for our drawings every single time. For this lesson, we're going to use a series of boxes to do the demonstrations and to do the drawings. So this is a subject that we're using for the purpose of our lesson to make things more clear and for us to be able to start with something that allows us to discuss all of the components that we are going to be dealing with in our drawings. So what we're going to do is we're going to build the basic foundation of our drawing so that it fits on the entire page. And that's the first thing that you want to establish. You want to figure out where your drawing is going to fit on the page. And the best way to do that is to establish where your boundaries are. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the highest point, the lowest point, furthest point to the left, and furthest point to the right. So when I'm looking at this series of boxes, I'm going to look at where my highest point is, and I'm going to say, well, I'm going to make my highest point somewhere around here. I know there's a little bit of space, but I want to give myself a little bit of space in case I make a mistake, which I probably will. So the other thing that I want to look at is how far to the left is that point? And I'm looking right now at the top corner, the middle corner of the white box. And I'm going to say that that corner is somewhere around here. I'm not really trying to draw the box. What I'm trying to do is know where that corner is so that I can compare it to the rest of the boxes and, of course, the proportions of my drawing. So once I establish my highest point, then I'm going to look for my lowest point. I'm going to say right now that my lowest point, to try to fill the page, is somewhere around here. I see that this is taller than it is wider. So that's why I'm turning my paper in a vertical position. The other thing that I'll notice is that that bottom corner is further left than here. So what I'm going to do is when I make that reference, that's where that corner is. Now there's a chance that I have to move this, but at least I start to map this out. And as I draw more of the boxes, then I can make corrections as I go along. So I've established my highest point and my lowest point. And now what I want to do is I want to see where the furthest edge or point or reference to my left is, and then where is it on the right hand side. So one of the things that I notice right now, just by comparing that, is that that point needs to move a little bit to the right. So this one will also move a little bit to the right. And then all you need to do is okay, so I've already made a subtle correction. I'm not worried about these marks. Those marks will play part of my drawing. They're part of my foundation, they're part of my underdrawing. They're not a bad thing to have. So I'm not worried about them. So right now, I'm going to look at the left edge. This is the left edge of the box. Right? That's the furthest thing to the left that I see. And then I'm just going to move to the right and I'm going to say, I think that right edge of the Granger box is somewhere around here. So right now, my boxes should fit inside of this rectangle. Like I said a minute ago, I will probably make a mistake, but I have enough space right now where I can make those corrections and fit the drawing in my entire page and fill the page. All right, so what I'm going to do as I build this drawing is kind of break it down a little bit more into its parts. When I think of this composition, I also want to keep a few things in mind. One of the things that I want to do is make sure that I don't center my subject matter on my paper. So I'm trying to create some energy and some tension in my drawing, not reduce it. So for any drawing that we do, I want to avoid putting the main subject matter in the center of the page. So I'm conscious of that as I draw. Now, I know that I'm going to make corrections here. So as I build this drawing, I want to try to keep two edges consistent or without moving them. So it's a lot easier for me to move 2 parts of the drawing than 4 parts of the drawing. So one of the things that I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that no matter what happens, unless it's something that I have to make a big change to, I am going to leave this as the lowest part of my drawing. And I'm going to leave this as my furthest to the left. So if there are going to be any changes, my changes are going to happen here and here. All right? So my furthest left, my lowest corner, highest, furthest to the right. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go from top to bottom and make references of height. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at how tall is the white box that's on top. And this drawing is built on a system of comparisons. So in other words, if this is the height of that white box, then this represents the height of the tall Granger box. So all I'm doing right now is I'm comparing this to this as I see it. So this is about how tall I see the white box, which means that in this example, this represents the Granger box. And I know that the Granger box is a little bit above the lowest point, right? So this space represents the Granger box. Now, as I move to the left, I see that the other small box is a little bit lower, right? It's about this height compared to the top of the Granger box. All I'm doing here is building like a simple grid. I am not trying to draw the boxes. All I'm trying to do is draw where they're going to go, right? And this is a system that you can apply to any subject matter. It doesn't matter whether you're drawing an object that's geometric or an organic object, a person, or a bunch of different objects in a room. If you keep this same system, it'll work for anything that you want to draw. So this represents the top of the small box that's on the left. And then this represents the bottom of that box. And then this space here is the box on the bottom left, the medium-sized box. That's what this space here represents. So once I've mapped this, now I'm going to go from left to right. And this is the furthest edge. The next thing that I see is the left edge of the middle box. That's what that is. All right? Then I see the center edge of the middle box. One of the things that I noticed here is that this edge, from my point of view, is a little bit left of this one. So if I was to visually create an extension to that line, I can see where this line compares to that one. This is the center edge of the bottom box. Now I notice that this edge may need to be moved a little bit more to the right. That corner is a little bit further right than I had originally drawn it. As I move further to the right,
I see the right side, the right panel of that box. I can already tell that this white box on top is not in the right place. This white box on top has to be moved over. So these are the kind of things that you notice as you start to build this foundation. And I want to look at these spaces. How wide is that section of the box based on how I see it right now? In a little bit, we can go into a system of measuring, but right now, this gesture that I'm doing is just based on what I see using just my naked eye. This is the bottom edge, and then this is the right edge of that bottom box. I am not worried about where this point or this line begins and ends. That's not important right now. All I want to know is how wide and how tall these sections are. So this is the bottom right box, this is the right edge, and just to the right of that, I see the edge of the Grainger box. Okay? This is the bottom corner of the Grainger box, right here. And this is the right side of the Grainger box. Now I want to go here and make my corrections. This is the center of the box. And then this really is the left edge of that white box. Top of the box. This is the center of the box, and the right edge. I'm making corrections as I go along. So as I see things, I'm going to just go ahead and correct them. So I'm spending a lot more time looking at my subject matter than I am my drawing. I'm not so worried about all of these little components right now in my drawing. What I want to do is just create a system of comparisons that can help me map out how big my drawing is going to be and where it's going to fit on my paper. The last thing that I want to worry about are angles. Angles are going to deceive you. So the last component that we're going to put is the angles of the boxes. Angles mean nothing if your proportions are off. So what I'm looking at here as I make these corrections is like where does this edge compare to the other edge? I'm just looking at how I can compare one line to the other, one size, one height, whether it's width or tall, how do they compare to each other? And the drawing will slowly but surely start to take shape. So that's kind of where we are right now. So this part of the drawing is what we call the gesture. What I'm trying to do is, as I build the foundation, I'm also creating a variety of lines. I'm starting to create some values in the drawing. Some people will look at this and be like, well, it's messy, right? Well, this mess is really part of what builds my drawing. I can start to use some of these sort of values, and some people may call it smudges, to kind of talk about how light eventually is going to be put into this drawing. We'll get to that in a minute. So what I'm going to do now is I just want to look at what I'm drawing and try to refine those things a little bit more. I want to make corrections where I need to, and I want to look for any points that maybe I haven't put into the drawing. So one of the things that I noticed right now, as I look at this top box, is that I need to draw the left edge of the Granger box. So this represents the left edge of the Granger box, and as that edge comes down, right, I noticed that there's some space here that I didn't deal with properly. So I'm going to deal now with the right edge of the middle box, and I noticed that I need to make some corrections. Corrections are normal. So as I build my drawing, there's absolutely no way that I can take into consideration every single thing that's happening here. So the more I look at my subject matter, the more I recognize there are components that I may need to make adjustments to. So all you do is just erase and change those components. There's nothing wrong with erasing. Erasing does not mean that the drawing is bad, all right? So the drawing is going to shift a little bit as I make these corrections. So now I see that I have this part of the box maybe drawn a little bit better. I see those proportions are more accurate to what I see. All right, so this is the little box on the left-hand side. This is the bigger box. This is the space in between the box right here. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to deal with this bottom box. And I want to make sure that I have these components lined up more accurately. I noticed that the center edge is in between these two. So I am going to draw that. Make one last correction here. That is somewhere around here. This represents the center edge of that box. This is my lowest point. This is furthest point to the left. And then the right edge of that box is pretty much right in the middle of the Granger box. All right. So this space here represents the bottom right-hand side of the box. This is the bottom of the Granger box. This is the bottom of the box at the bottom. Middle box, top box, right edge of Granger box. So right now, as far as I can see, these proportions look pretty good to me. I may need to make a little bit of a correction on the width of the Granger box. Right now that right side looks a little bit too wide. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you guys a little bit more of a visual reference to what it is that I'm drawing and how does it look. One of the things that I notice right now is that my horizon line, which is the level of my eye, is somewhere around here. So this red line that I'm drawing is my horizon line. The horizon line is the height of your eye if you look dead straight at your subject matter. So for me, this is where that is. This is a really important point because it's going to affect angles. Because that horizon line is a little lower than the height of this box, and it's certainly a bit lower than the height of that box, it means that even if you see it flat, it cannot be flat. This makes that the angles point down. So one of the rules about angles is that any angle that is above the horizon line slopes down like the roof of a house. As I bring this part out a little bit more, that means that that edge points down like that. So one of the other things that I'm using here is I'm using my eraser as if it were a drawing tool. Eraser isn't just to eliminate, but it also helps me to create contrast and helps me to define shapes a bit more. Contrast is good. I want to have contrast in my drawing because that allows me to create more volume, more of a three-dimensional appearance, right? And it makes objects look more solid, more grounded. So to go to this one, right, this angle here, it's almost like impossible to see the difference between this corner and that corner. So half of what you need to keep in mind is that there's a knowledge component to drawing. 50% of the drawings in our class, in this session, are based on what we see, but 50% is what we know. So we have to keep some of this knowledge in mind. Because my horizon line is lower than that, then this angle is actually going to take a very subtle slope down. It's subtle because the horizon line is very close to that point, right? And you're going to see that to be very different on the bottom. The bottom is going to be a lot more obvious. The other thing that I want to mention is that in a square box, right, where the left side and right side are somewhat equal, the side that you see less of is going to have a steeper angle because it's further away. So this side is going to appear a little bit more flat than this side. So this slope is going to be more severe. This angle is going to be a little bit more severe on the left-hand side compared to the right-hand side because I see more of this side of the box, hence it looks flatter than this side of the box. Okay. When we go to the bottom, there's going to be more of an obvious slope. So I can see that this slope points up a bit more severely. Any angle that is below your horizon line is going to go in the opposite direction. It's going to point up. So this angle points down, that angle points up. What they're eventually going to do is get narrower and narrower and narrower as they get further away from the box. This angle is going to point up a bit more severe than that. If you want to see the severity of that angle, an easy thing to do is to draw a horizontal line here, and you draw a horizontal line a little bit higher, and that, when you connect the dots, will create a more or less severe angle. So we can see at the bottom of the box, is creating this angle. This side is that. So this part of the box here, this side, are starting to take shape. What I'm going to do is I'm going to progress towards these two boxes right now. So I have my proportions fairly well drawn, but I see that there's a difference between the way that I draw these boxes compared to the way that I drew these. And one of the things that you'll notice right here is that because my horizon line is above the box, right, and I'm actually looking down on the box, so I see the top of the box. Because I see the top of the box, and because my angles are now below the horizon line, those angles are going to point up. So the angles are now pointing up, just like the ones on the bottom. So I see a little bit of the top of the box, which means that the box is drawn like this. This corner is a little bit left of center, so that you'll notice that because I see a little bit more of the right side of the box, those corners will not line up. Like they won't stack on top of each other. I'm doing this drawing with a heavy chalk partly so that it's more visible, but it also helps me to build values in my drawing. We're going to get to linear perspective a little bit more, but you can see that that top view of the box is starting to look pretty well. Looks fairly accurate right now. I don't want to worry about the complete finish, right, as a finished product right now. I'm just trying to, again, build the foundation of what it is that I'm drawing. There's no point in spending hours to establish the fine details of what it is that I'm drawing just to realize that it's the wrong size or the wrong place. So I want to be able to make those corrections early, right? I wouldn't obsess too much about the angles. I'm really drawing them right now so that you can see how this drawing starts to build, right? I notice that this angle is a little bit, so I see some of the top of the box here. This angle almost touches this corner. Okay. And as I build this angle here and connect it, like if it was a see-through, then I can draw that more correctly. I'm going to keep some ideas of my drawing in mind as far as what's supposed to happen with linear perspective. So this part of our exercises are really more about building foundation than they are about what the style or the look of our drawing is going to be. I'm not worried about style. I am not worried about aesthetics. Not that there's anything wrong with this, but I'm not concerned about those things right now. What I want to do is I want to learn about what's happening in my drawing. How do I do this so that my drawing is technically correct? And once I understand some of those technical components, then I can start worrying about style, energy, mood, what it is that the drawing is intending to say. How is the drawing going to communicate to my audience? And depending on my audience, I'll need to create, a different mood, a different technique, a different style. But what I do want is my drawing to be accurate, right? I don't want those components to get in the way. I just noticed that this part of the drawing is a little bit off, that angle. So I just corrected it. That looks a little bit better. Again, angles here point up. This angle is going to be higher than that one, because I see less of this side of the box. Here we have those 4 boxes that look pretty close to real. Proportions look pretty good. Maybe there's a few things that need to be tweaked and adjusted from my point of view here. But I can do that in a few minutes. You can see the angles are starting to look 3-dimensional. The shapes are also coming from the background. So utilizing some of this series of values that are put into the drawing help me to also make comparisons about how light and values are going to eventually affect the drawing. All of these components which are structural, and then I'll spend another couple of hours refining the proportions of the drawing, and then that should leave me 4 or 5 hours to do all of the real refining, lighting, line work, shadows, all of those components that really make the drawing more refined. I'll have a lot of time to do that. But there's no point in me worrying about shading and worried about very specific things that have to do with details until I know that the drawing is going to be accurate in proportion and in scale. One quick note, what I'm doing here is I'm holding the chalk like this, and I'm using different edges of the chalk to create different types of lines. So if I want to make a sharp line, then what I do is I put that chalk on a corner, and I get a sharp line, like so. Do not use this in this manner. You're not going to be able to create a variety of lines, and you're also not going to have a lot of movement in your hand. You want your arm, shoulder, and hand to have freedom. If you do this, then you're doing stuff like this, and your hand is not going to have freedom. So your line is going to be a choppy, scratchy, little short line. You're not going to have good movement. But if you hold your chalk like that, you can create a lot more rhythm, a lot more movement in your arm and hand, and it's also less taxing on your small muscles. Okay. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to look at my drawing, and it's good to step back about 5 or 6 feet, look at the drawing, and also look at what I'm drawing. And one of the things that I noticed here is that the proportions from my point of view of this box are a little bit off. I'm noticing that I drew this side of the box too wide, and I drew this side of the box too narrow. So one of the things that I'm going to do now is, before I go any further to refining the drawing, I want to again see if I need to make any corrections that I can just make, by looking and comparing. So that is the most obvious thing that I noticed. I noticed that this line is really in the middle, and I see more space here. So I need to move that edge. Okay, so if I move that edge, then it means that I'm also moving this one. Everybody makes mistakes. So, get used to it. I'm also noticing here there's some little details about this box, because my horizon line is below that corner. So in reality, I see a little bit of the bottom of that box. And I'm not going to worry about it too much now, but it's something that I'm going to take note of and actually draw with more detail a little bit later. There's going to be a whole series of shadows and shading here, so I'm also not worried too much about where some of these values are right now, because they may actually come in pretty handy later on. So here's that corner. This looks more accurate to me right now. I definitely see more of this side. I want to make a better reference to this side of the box. Closer to this edge. And this edge may need to come in just a little to the left. I had to move this edge a little to the left, and I had to move this edge a little to the right. One of the things that will happen is the more you draw by looking and really paying attention to these things, the better your eye is going to be at picking up proportions, the right perspective, and all of the components that you're going to need to be able to make a good drawing. Okay? So that to me looks much more accurate right now than it did before. This angle is a little bit more, it's a little sloped a little further down than I had it. All right, and then all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move along and see if I made any other mistakes in my drawing. So I'm going to pay attention to this component. I'm looking at this space. This looks pretty good. I see maybe just a little bit of corrections that need to be made here. This angle looks like it's a hair more flat than I drew it. So I'm just paying attention to where, for example, where does this line intersect or cut into this box, right? How high or low is this line intersecting into this line right here? So I see that being just a little bit lower than I had it. I think this side, this height is fairly good compared to what I see. So really, the corrections that I've made have been pretty minimal. And that's a good sign. That means that my eye is picking up things fairly well. And that my corrections, are really minimal. If your corrections need to be bigger, then fine, you'll have bigger corrections to make. It's not a bad thing. What we want to do is be able to make those corrections. All right, I'm just going to check this. This right now looks a little odd, so I think I just need to bring that point down a hair. That still looks good. This is my lowest point. This point here is a little bit too low. So I am going to bring that point up. And this angle and this angle I can see join. So they look more like that. Okay. This angle is certainly lower. That looks correct. Right now, I'm happy with this part of my drawing. As a gesture, I feel like I've gotten all of the components that I need to have as a gesture. The proportions look pretty good. I have angles and perspective that are pretty close. I know some are going to need a little tweaking, but they look pretty close. I have some foundation as far as the values, which are going to help me build my lights and darks later on. And the drawing is taking up most of the page. I notice also that my composition is not dead center. This point here is further right than center, and this one here is further left than center. So this allows my eye to move back and forth with more speed. It makes my drawing more energetic. I also have a variety of lines that I've created here, so it makes the drawing have movement. If you only have one type of line, then your drawing is going to look stagnant. Right? It's going to look too stiff. Remember that a lot of what we're doing is giving our drawing some energy, a mood, certainly some movement if possible. Even if we're drawing objects as stiff as boxes, the drawing can still have a mood, it can still have some energy, right? And we're going to develop those things a little bit more as the drawing moves further.